Good evening, everyone. Over the next few days, we're going to take the next step in our journey towards Christmas. Our lovely little Advent tree will go away, and our very special Christmas tree will go up, adorned in very strange and wonderful manner. As you may know, this tree that we erect here is very different from the other Christmas trees going up, or already up in many sitting rooms across Ireland and the wider world. While many of the other trees in the world are festive or have sentimental trinkets of family value, the Anthroposophical Christmas tree is a picture of man and his evolving place in the wider cosmos. So I hope that you can bear with me as I try to paint this picture for you as best I can. First, we're going to start with the question, what is with Christmas trees? Why do we have Christmas trees? And where does the tradition come from? From what we know, Christmas trees are usually conifers, evergreens, and they probably originated in Germany. They're usually linked to Saint Boniface, but also in Eastern Europe, in modern day Estonia and Latvia. And they start around 16th century or so.
I'm sure not much earlier, because when I did this thing on the Christmas tree, or on the pine tree, I read that they were used they came really from the north, through the northern mist.
Well, one has Yule logs, and one does have one precedent that goes back into medieval times in the paradise tree, but they're slightly different. What we now consider a Christmas tree, as we now have it, you could say belongs around 15th, 16th century. And was mainly among the Protestant population of Germany. And so it got a little bit more popular as time went by, but it's only really become a big international thing since the second half of the 19th century. It started with fairly affluent people and filtered down. So we have from the 16th century a description of how the tree was decorated. It was decorated with roses made of coloured paper, apples, wafers, so usually very thin. So, for example, the Roman Catholic communion is a wafer.
Yeah, right. Now it comes.
You also find it in biscuits, but there was tinsel. I don't know what that meant at the time. Probably wasn't the tinsel that we have now, but some sort of garland, and sweetmeats.
Meats?
Well, sweetmeats could also be mincemeat, dried fruits.
Oh, yeah.
So the candles then also come from Central Europe, a little bit towards Eastern Europe. The candles were introduced by the Moravians. So we have all these symbols that are very familiar to us. We have the roses, we have the apples, in a strange way the candles, of course, and in a strange way also the wafers, because the wafers have a special significance. They're not just biscuits. So the modern Christmas tree, as we know it, you can say it's a fairly modern thing. Rudolf Steiner, in his lecture on the Christmas tree, says it's 100 years old. It's actually a little bit older, but the reason he says it's only about 100 years old is because he grew up predominantly in the Catholic regions, and it only spread into the Catholic regions of the German-speaking world at the end of the 19th century.
Rossiger was the famous man. In Austria, one says Rossiger was the one who had brought in the Christmas tree.
But
Peter Rossiger.
Rossica. But we do have a slightly older precedent for a Christmas tree. There used to be a communal version of it. We have the so-called Tree of Paradise of the medieval mystery plays. Medieval mystery plays were usually given between the 23rd and 25th of December. Around the commemoration and name day of Adam and Eve in various countries. So in these paradise plays or mystery plays, and there are a lot more of them than just the Uber plays, of course. They were very widespread as far as England and across the entirety of Europe. But in these plays, there was a tree that was decorated with apples that represented the forbidden fruit, the tree in paradise, but also with wafers, as in a symbol of communion to represent the Eucharist and redemption. So in these paradise trees, there was this sort of path of return or coming closer to Godhead, which from a certain perspective you can say is also there in the Anthroposophical 3. So it was used as a setting for the plays, and these things then came into home settings. The trees did, and the apples may have eventually been replaced by baubles. But that is really the oldest, very recognizable form of the Christmas tree as a decorated tree. Now, it may be that prior to this there were Yule trees, conifers that were brought indoors during that season, but this addition of things like apples and roses and wafers and the like, this is something that is fairly modern on the grand scale of things. The Anthroposophical Christmas tree very much draws its inspiration from all these trees. The coloured paper roses, the apples, the candles, the symbols of man's redemption or reconnection to the spiritual world. The relationship to the paradise tree of the mystery play is also explicit in the unfolding of the tree and its additions in how Rudolf Steiner indicates the Uber play should be performed. And we will return to that a little bit later. But for now we're going to look a little bit at the paradise tree. What is this paradise tree? What is it a symbol of? What is it representing, or what is it as an impulse?
Saturn, planet, and
well, yes, so the conifers are a plant of Saturn, but we are told about, certainly in the Christian tradition, we are told about trees in paradise. 2 trees specifically, a tree of knowledge of good and evil, and a tree of life. So in Genesis 2, verses 8 to 9, we have, "Now the Lord God had planted a garden in the east, in Eden, and there he put the man he had formed. The Lord God made all kinds of trees grow out of the ground, trees that were pleasing to the eye and good for food. In the middle of the garden were the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil." So it was eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil that Adam, through Eve, fell from a paradisic state of grace and closeness to God. And through him, Eve fell from this paradisic state. The picture language of Genesis tells us that Adam and Eve were thrown out. They were ejected from the garden to wander in a harsh and unforgiving world. We are told of the tree of life that, "Lest he put forth his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever." The cherubim with a flaming sword were placed at the east end of the garden to guard the way to the tree of life. Now that's a very interesting image, because of course Adam was only forbidden to eat from the tree of life after the fall. that before the fall, the only thing he was forbidden was the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And it is only after that the tree of life becomes a guarded mystery. So if the human story ended there, it would be a tragic one. But in the Apocrypha, we are also given the promise of redemption. We are given this figure of Seth, who is the son of Adam, whom the God Yahweh has given as a substitute for Abel. And he returns to Eden when Adam is dying. In 1907, in a lecture cycle on the Gospel of John, Rudolf Steiner speaks about Seth's return to paradise and about the paradise tree. Seth one day came to the gate of paradise. The cherub with the fiery sword allowed him to enter the garden, out of which man had been driven. There he saw two trees that were intertwined with each other, the tree of life and the tree of knowledge. And the cherub told Seth to take 3 seeds from these trees that were intertwined. When Adam, his father, died, Seth laid these 3 seeds in his mouth, and from the grave grew a 3-fold tree, which revealed itself in radiant fire, and it glowed and formed itself into the words, I am he who was, who is, and who is to come. The wood of this tree, which had grown out of Adam's grave, was used for many things. Out of it was fashioned a staff with which Moses accomplished his miracles. The wood was also used for the pillars standing at the door of Solomon's temple. With it was built the bridge over which Jesus passed when he was led to death. Finally, from this wood was made the cross to which Jesus was nailed on Golgotha.
All this is lectures.
This is from Rudolf Steiner's Gospel of John, 25th of November 1907. So it's fairly early. It's roughly a year after he gives the lecture on the Christmas tree symbols itself. It's a big picture. It's a very big picture. The tree that caused the fall and the tree of life growing together as one tree, producing one fruit. The tree of knowledge is often depicted as growing from the earth, and the tree of life as growing with its roots in the heavens, giving an image of a great pillar from heaven to earth. Now, this tree of life is also something that exists in Jewish mystical tradition as a diagram or image of a path of return. It offers a sort of Neoplatonic diagram of the journey from the earth through the planetary spheres, or what they call sephirot, or emanations, on through the zodiac and arrive at the place of God or the spiritual world. So here is a later image of the tree of life from the Jewish mystical tradition, and you'll see that it has a geocentric view of this path of ascent to the spiritual world, from the lunar sphere to Venus to Mercury to Sun. So how we see the world from where we are, which is a very Neoplatonic view of how we arrive at the heavens. Rudolf Steiner also, very early on, looked at the tree of life, and he even uses some of the Jewish names for the Sephirot initially. So his tree is European or English speaking, so it reads Rather than from right to left, it reads from left to right. However, it has the essential same description, but he worked with this for a while and he found that the essential quality that was there was still essentially planetary. And so he evolved a later image of the tree of life, this here, which if you follow the sequence of the planets from Saturn to Sun to Moon, you will see the evolution of the planets in his picture of world evolution. Rudolf Steiner was very much aware of this earlier esoteric tradition of the tree of life, but really brings it into a transformation out of the insights that he's already had through Anthroposophy. And we have to remember, of course, that in 1906, 1907, when he really started speaking publicly about these things, that he was still part of the Theosophical Society, and that a lot of these things couldn't be fully public. So we have this tree of life image. We are reminded that if Adam ate from the tree of life, which was only forbidden after the fall, he could gain eternal life. So you could say that it is a path towards godhood. In the Golden Legend, we are given this image of the tree of life and the tree of knowledge becoming one tree and forming a pillar from heaven to earth. Another very strong image in Rudolf Steiner's 1907 description of this Golden Legend, where Seth goes back to paradise, is that the tree, this is hard for me to say because I have no TH sound, so sometimes I'm saying tree and sometimes I'm saying tree. I'll try and make clear when I'm saying tree and when I'm saying the number 3. But in this description of when Seth goes back to garden and plants these 3 seeds in Adam's mouth, or in some versions in Adam's mouth and in his 2 nostrils, that a 3-fold tree grows from this. So it is a tree with 3 distinct aspects as it grows, this paradise tree that is grown out of the grave of Adam. So we're left with the image of 3 pillars in a way, 2 polar extremes and a middle way. We have the pillar of Jachin and Boaz in the Temple of Solomon, a pillar of mercy and a pillar of severity. We're also reminded of the pillars Rudolf Steiner describes as part of the Hibernian mysteries, one malleable and with no resistance, and one which resisted any attempts to make an impression. And the initiate stands between these extremes as a middle pillar. We're also told the paradise tree that arose from Adam's corpse supplied the wood of the cross for the redeemed deed of Christ on Golgotha. Here we also have the picture of 3 pillars as 2 extremes and as Christ in the middle. In 1914, in a lecture cycle published as Christ and the Human Soul, Dr. Steiner says, Christ on the cross between the 2 malefactors. The malefactor on the left mocks at Christ. If thou wilt be God, help thyself and us. The malefactor on the right says that the other ought not to speak thus, for both had merited their fate of crucifixion, the just award for their deeds, whereas he was innocent and yet had to experience the same fate. And the malefactor on the right went on to say, think of me when thou art in thy kingdom. And Christ answered him, verily I say unto thee, today thou shalt be with me in paradise. So we have a figure on the left representing Ahriman, is a pillar of severity or hardness. we have the figure on the right representing Lucifer, who is the pillar of mercy or of softness. And in the middle hangs Christ as the pillar of equanimity and consciousness. When we only consider the cross with Christ, we only see a small part of the mystery, as the crucifixion contains a trinity. Through our fight against these two powers, we grow, and we too can reach equilibrium. So on that diagram of Ethiam, the tree of life, you also have these three pillars, a right pillar and a left pillar, a pillar of mercy and severity, and in the center you have a pillar of mildness, or a middle way, which is where one has a solar center. The Christmas tree is the path of humanity and of the individual initiate through the cycles of world evolving. So first on the tree we have, not in perfect sequential order, we have the alpha and we have the omega. We have the spanning of time, the beginning and the end, as well as the tree of life being in Genesis. We are reminded that the tree of life is described at length in Revelations, or the Apocalypse of John. Between the beginning and end, a great cosmic drama unfolds. From Rudolf Steiner's insight, we know that these revelations belong very much to our time, these events of the apocalypse. We also have, with the Alpha and the Omega, two poles or pillars balanced by the central part of the tree. Before speaking about the symbols on the central stem of the tree, we can first look at the symbols of the planets, and we start down the bottom with, and in a way it's quite an apt symbol, that the conifers is the symbol of this world evolution, because they have been here since this first stage that's described, our Saturn or Sun or Moon and Mars. In the picture of world evolution that was offered by Rudolf Steiner, particularly in occult science, lots of other places, these are the places where what would become the physical, the etheric, the astral, and the I being, or Ich Mensch, the ego, for want of a better word, really have their coming about, maybe not as they are now. So the physical body, for example, would have been more like a blueprint in old Saturn, but the basis for what is now our physical body came about at this time. He also speaks about densification from warmth through air and water into our current solid state. The insights of Anthroposophy tell us of the pivotal role of the incarnation and sacrifice of Christ at a time when the human beings and the earth, to which their development is intimately intertwined, were to become so hardened that the earth was beginning to die. This pivotal time, described by Steiner as the turning point of time, which happens somewhere here to here, somewhere between Mars and Mercury, that at this pivotal point of time, the mystery of Golgotha happens. The time before the deed at Golgotha is represented by Mars, this hardening process, and this deed at Golgotha and its effects represented by Mercury, the healing medicine. So in occult science, he describes this period of Earth evolution as the Earth period of evolution. So you'll notice conspicuously that Mars and Mercury are often missing from this description of world evolution, where it goes Saturn, Sun, Moon, Earth. But that is because Earth has two distinct aspects from it. This before period, where we were entering very heavily and prematurely into death processes, and a turning point somewhere at that center, and I suppose a re-enlivening. From here we have further states of progression that represent a path of return to the spiritual world and an ever finer and more ethereal existence. So after Mercury we have Jupiter, we have Venus, and we also have Vulcan, which we'll return to a little bit later. Rudolf Steiner also describes this imagination of world evolution as it relates to the development of individual faculties in the individual and in humanity as a whole. He says there are 7 levels of human consciousness according to the 7 members. Trance, which is an awareness of the physical body. Deep sleep, which belongs to the etheric body. Dreaming consciousness, which belongs to the astral body. Waking consciousness, which belongs to the ego. And psychic, suprapsychic, and spiritual consciousness, which are to develop in the future. He also describes these otherwise a little bit later, and I'll return to that. So this future evolution is described with the symbols for Jupiter, Venus, and to a degree he speaks about this last period as Vulcan, for which there is no symbol, but at the very top of the tree we have a pentagram, which in many ways is an appropriate symbol for this, and we'll return to why a little bit later. So in between, at this crossing point from left to right here, we have this journey. We can imagine a kind of turning point. Pralaya, a point of pause between out-breath and in-breath, or in-breath and out-breath. Now we can begin to turn to the symbols that occupy the stem of the tree. While the planets take a winding staircase up the tree, the symbols climb the stem of the tree as if a ladder. The bottom of the tree has a square, which describes our fourfold organization, being our physical, etheric, astral, and ego organizations. Above this comes a triangle, which describes our spiritual organization that is not yet connected with our fourfold organization. In Camp Hill, there's a funny tradition, certainly in the Newton D workshop, where the triangle and the square are hung together. They're actually completely separate symbols. It's purely pragmatic that they come together.
It's purely what?
Pragmatic, it's practical,
Yeah.
and it's maybe a little bit aspirational. That we're coming a little bit closer to integrating some of that. So yeah, as we ascend the central stem, we then come to another symbol that really belongs very much to this time after the mystery of Golgotha, the Tarot. In his 1906 lecture on the symbols of the Christmas tree, Rudolf Steiner describes the symbol of Tarot as follows. Above the triangle is the symbol for Tarot. Those who were initiated in the Egyptian mysteries knew how to interpret this sign. They knew too how to read the Book of Thoth, consisting of 78 leaves on which were inscribed all happenings in the world from the beginning to the end, from Alpha to Omega, and which could be read if the signs were rightly put together. These pictures gave expression to the life that dies and then springs again to new life. Whoever could combine the right numbers with the right pictures were able to read the book. This wisdom of numbers and of pictures had been taught from time immemorial. In the Middle Ages, it was still in the foreground, although little of it survives today. So what is Rudolf Steiner describing here? In a way, he's pointing to the old clairvoyance as a language of image, so the ancient Egyptians, hieroglyphs, and the ability to read the Akashic records written in the picture language. Some people read this indication, and the thing that they pick out is this reference to the 78-page Book of Thoth, which is, of course, a reference to the tarot or tarocchi. These 78 images that come from Italy, and that at the time that Rudolf Steiner was speaking about this, both the French and the British had an occult revival and had very strongly looked at a mythological link between Egypt and the tarot, and this pictorial knowledge, or really coming to understanding through picture knowing. But the point isn't the tarot itself, but a more broad understanding of the language of pictures as the basis for developing the faculty of imagination. That is the root of it that is being alluded to. So in the above-mentioned modes of consciousness, Steiner attributes this faculty to psychic capacities, though he would later come to describe this faculty of new clairvoyance as imagination. It relates to the spirit self and the transformed astral body. Then we come to the symbol of Tau, which for many of us it evokes a memory of ancient Egypt, this symbol of the Ankh. But Rudolf Steiner describes it as belonging to much older civilizations. He describes it thus: above this symbol is the Tau, the sign that is a reminder of the conception of the divine held by our early forefathers. It comes from the word Tau. Before Europe, Asia, and Africa were scenes of human civilization, these early forebears of ours lived on the continent of Atlantis, which was finally submerged by mighty floods. In the Germanic sagas of Nephilim and Nibelheim, the memory of Atlantis still lives. For Atlantis was not surrounded by pure air. Vast cloud masses moved over the land, like those to be seen today clustered around the peaks of high mountains. The sun and the moon did not shine clearly in the heavens. They were surrounded by rainbows, by the sacred iris. At that time, man understood the language of nature. Today, he no longer understands what speaks to him in the rippling of waves, in the noise of winds, in the rustling of leaves, in the roll of thunder. But in old Atlantis, he understood it. He felt it all as reality. And within these voices of clouds and waters and leaves and winds, a sound rang forth. Thou. That am I. The man of Atlantis heard and understood it, feeling that Tau pervaded the whole universe. So again, with each of these symbols, he speaks about the past, but he speaks about a return to faculties that the human being had in a new way. Here he speaks about a special awareness and relationship and even co-creating perhaps with the etheric world. And it takes on a new form in our future evolution. How can we awaken to the etheric world? In the above modes of consciousness, Steiner attributes this faculty to supra-psychic consciousness, though he would later come to describe this faculty as inspiration. It relates to the life spirit and the transformed etheric body. Finally, we come to the symbol of the five-pointed star or pentagram. Again, we turn to Steiner's indications to discern what this guiding star might lead towards. Finally, the cosmic symbol of man is the pentagram, hanging at the top of the tree. Of the deepest meaning of the pentagram, we may not now speak. But it is the star of humanity, of evolving humanity. It is the star that all wise men follow, as did the priest sages of old. It symbolizes the very essence of meaning of earth existence. It comes to birth in the holy night, because the greatest light shines forth from the deepest darkness. Man is living on towards a state where the light is to be born in him, where words full of significance will be replaced by others equally significant, where it will no longer be said, "The darkness comprehendeth not the light." But when the truth will ring out from cosmic space, the darkness gives way before the light that shines in the star of humanity. And now the darkness comprehended the light. Here the light or spiritualizing processes in the human being leads to a body of light, an archetypal man, called in the Jewish tradition Adam Kadmon. The spiritual archetype of humanity as a star is an image of perfection and the world of forms. In the above modes of consciousness, Steiner attributes this to the faculty of spiritual consciousness. He would later come to describe this faculty as intuition. What can one intuit of our archetypal or spiritual nature? Surely for now it is only a dim gleaming, but the guiding star above us lights the path ahead. It relates to the spirit body or spirit man, the transformed human body. The symbols of the central stem could be considered a path of Christian anthroposophical initiation, gaining faculties while maintaining a middle and balanced path. Of course, there are other things on this tree, which we are going to get to in a moment. But probably the best way to look at the gestalt of the tree is through the mystery plays mentioned earlier, and specifically the Oberhofer plays commonly performed in the Anthroposophical movement. We won't go too much into our history, except to say that they came to the attention of Rudolf Steiner through a teacher of his, who was a bit of an anthropologist, and he had recorded the still living traditions of these plays in a relatively undisturbed area where folk traditions were still alive. So these plays were still being performed. There are 3 plays. The Paradise play describing the temptation, fall and expulsion of Adam and Eve from paradise, and at the end a little promise of possible future salvation. There is the Shepherd's Play, focusing on the account of the Luke Gospel, and the King's Play, focusing on the events of the Matthew Gospel. As we know, Rudolf Steiner highlighted the fundamental difference between these two accounts of the birth of Jesus, and he describes two Jesus children whose destinies later weave together. It is a revolutionary and deeply esoteric understanding of Christianity. For the Oberhofer plays, Rudolf Steiner gives instructions on their performance, including the appearance of the Paradise Tree. For the Paradise play, the tree holds only apples, as a reminder of the fall and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But it also gives us the hope and means for the seeds of redemption for the future paradise tree which grows from Adam's grave. For the Shepherd's Play and the Nathan Child, roses and candles are added. The tree blossoms, and the rose is a symbol of love, beauty, and unfurling. 33 roses ideally adorn the tree. 30 for the first years of Jesus' life, and 3 white roses for the years following the baptism in the Jordan and the indwelling of the being of Christ. The rose cross, and we must remember that the paradise tree is the wood of the cross, if you recall, is also a symbol of the death of the lower nature and the resurrection of the higher. The candles likewise continue this theme of the life of Jesus, with ideally 30 white candles and 3 red atop. This is why I say ideally. I practically they either don't fit or you don't have bright candles, but that's what it's supposed to symbolize. The tree is lit up. As the Gospels are the archetypal biography, we too can walk through our lives in the light and love of Christ and experience the illuminating light of the Gospels in our own biographies. For the King's Play in the Zarathustra Child, the tree is completed with the symbols that adorn the tree. The light and love of Christ becomes a progressive path of development through the conscious cultivation of a path of development, a path of initiation.
So, in the symbols, but it is not represented the two, or is it the two Jesus child?
Well, you have to remember, for the Luke Child and for the Shepherd's Play, only the roses and the light appear. It is only in the King's Play, with the arrival of the Zarathustra Child, that the tree is completed, and only then the symbols are added.
Sorry.
So in the unfolding of the Oberhofer plays as they're staged, for the Paradise Play, there's only apples.
Yeah.
Then for the Shepherd's Play, in addition to the apples, they add the roses and the candles. And then finally, for the King's Play, they complete this gestalt of the tree with the symbols.
Now I got it.
Many of you have heard about the symbols of the tree before, the tree in Eden and all of this. But each year we revisit and rekindle the knowledge anew that its origins, light and knowledge can allow the Christmas mystery and its fruition at the mystery of Golgotha to come to full fruition in us also. I'd like to finish with some closing words from Rudolf Steiner's lecture on the Christmas tree, as he, as is often the case, says it much better than I ever could. This should resound, and the spiritual light ray forth from the Christmas festival. We will celebrate this Christmas festival as the festival of the supreme ideal of mankind. For then it will bring to birth in our souls the joyful confidence. I too shall experience the birth of the higher man within me. In me too the birth of the Saviour, the birth of the Christos, will take place. So yes, that's where I wanted to get to. So thank you for your time and indulgence.
Thank you very much.